I'm going to introduce Dorothy and Louise first, and then they can get into their talk. So, welcome. It is very nice to have everybody here. The first talk in question is called Scholarly Profiling in Wikidata, Creating a Knowledge Graph for the SEEKCommons Open. Um, I'll begin with Dorothy, who is an information scientist, archivist, and open technology advocate, currently pursuing an MS in Library and Information Science at the Pratt Institute School of Information. She was Wikimedian in residence at the Metropolitan New York Library Council, promoting open access and open data workflows in galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. She's also contributed to numerous international Wikipedia programs organized around equity and governance in Wikimedia groups. She's helped to design and develop plans for open source projects and nonprofits. Dorothy is currently working on the knowledge graph of the SEEKCommons network. Luis Felipe R. Murillo is an assistant professor in anthropology at the University of Notre Dame. He serves as a fellow of the ND Technology Ethics Center and the Lucy Institute for Data and Society. His work has been dedicated to the anthropological study of computing with a focus on design of common technologies for addressing social and environmental issues. LF Murillo, to use the initials, serves as principal investigator of the Social Environmental Knowledge Commons, that is SEEKCommons, guiding and integrating different components of the project. So I'm going to leave it to you to go from here, and I'm sure everybody will be thrilled to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm having some difficulty, so if you would do the slide share for our slides, that would be ideal because I am on an old Linux computer that's having difficulty with Zoom.
Okay, let me
Yeah.
the PDF up. Let me just find it in my Fusion Windows. Does everybody see this?
Perfect.
Okay. You can just let me know when to advance the slides.
All right. Thank you so much for having us. This is an amazing conference, and I was able to come last year and just so happy to be part of this community. We already did our introduction, so we'll go straight to Luis Felipe talking about what we're doing with SEEKCommons. And you can go to the next slide.
Oh, sorry, hold on. Okay. There.
Perfect.
Hello, I'm very excited to be here. This is my very first Semantic Web Research and Development Conference. So I would like to first tell you about the project members. So Dorothy and I are representing a big group of folks conducting research in the context of SEEKCommons project. So you can see there are several institutions involved and several colleagues. So we wanted to make sure we acknowledge everyone who's involved. So Mark, could you pass to the next one, please? This is with you, Dorothy.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to be talking about today is the lessons that we've learned while in the process of constructing a resource hub based on the Wikidata knowledge graph and focusing on adding outcomes and scholarly contributions from folks in our research network. And meanwhile, we're also investigating how we approach scholarly profiling and how we give credit to scholars and thinking about representing often invisible community-based research contributions to science and technology, including data sets and open source software contributions and hardware and things that may not have data models for them in Wikidata thus far. And you can go to the next slide.
So before we get to the details of the work on the knowledge graph for the SEEKCommons project, we would like to provide you with some background on the project itself. So the SEEKCommons project is dedicated to the research and the support of open technologies for social and environmental projects. And we have a scope that is very, very, very tight. So we're only focusing on projects that integrate social and environmental research and projects that collaborate, have a collaborative component, and are engaged with climate impacted communities. And also, not only that, but also projects that involve the development of open technologies, open data sets, free and open source software, open hardware, open educational resources as part of the work conducted. So the project that we are conducting is some sort of meta project about other social environmental projects that are being conducted within the scope that we determined. And our project is funded by two sections of the National Science Foundation. So we're funded by the STS program and the Public Access Directory initiative. So we have two sources of funding. So the mandate is actually to respond to the needs of these two parts of the NSF. One is more connected with the social sciences and humanities research, and the other one is more connected with the advancement of public access and open access throughout the NSF.
Next slide.
So just another quick bit on the project structure. So the project is organized around three axes. So one is open science, the second one is STS, science and technology studies, and the third one is social environmental action research. So it's social environmental research with an action component, with a community engagement component. And the way we conceive of the project is that we're trying to build a translational bridge or an interface between open science and social environmental action. That's how we conceive of the SEEKCommons projects. So next slide, please. And here, to wrap up, we have an overview of the research network that we're building as part of the project. So the project has a component which is dedicated to research, and the rest of the grant is actually dedicated to create a network and support other projects under the umbrella of the SEEKCommons project. So you can see we have the three axes: science and technology studies, social environmental action, and open science. And we have several colleagues who have been working on these axes and providing contributions. So we have around 52 members right now, and we are going to expand to 60 in the year 2025 and to the end of this year. So next slide, please.
All right. And so now that we've given you an overview about the SEEKCommons project, we're going to dive into the resource hub and the specific work that we've been doing to build a subgraph using Wikidata. And why do we? So what we've been trying to do is model this research network using Wikidata. And so the slide says, why do we care about modeling research networks in Wikidata? Well, many of you probably are researchers, and you know that research happens necessarily through collaboration. And often groups will receive grants that cross multiple universities or multiple institutions. Maybe a university is collaborating with nonprofits or community members. And although we often receive credit as individual researchers, we don't have great ways of modeling collaboration. And at the same time, when you apply for a grant and you're working with many other people, funders will expect metrics reporting, and they'll expect you to report on your project outcomes as a group. So modeling research networks can help us figure out what are the actual outcomes of our work as a group. And beyond that, we've also been thinking a lot reflexively about how visualizing what we're doing and modeling what we're doing as we're doing it can help us learn about ourselves. And so that reflexive work of by representing ourselves that we can learn about ourselves and then hopefully do better work, understand the gaps in our work, and create meaning through visualizing our work and reflecting on those visualizations. So you can go to the next slide. So we're going to start zooming down into the methodology, and some of the big areas of our methods have been mapping out what are the contributions of socio-environmental researchers that work with open technologies and do open science. So really mapping out what are the things that we could model, and then developing the specific data models in Wikidata, and also not just developing them, but curating them and contributing to existing models and in conversation. And then also just creating the Wikidata items about our network outputs, whether they're papers or other things we'll be talking about. Many of you may have experience with Wikidata queries. So we've also been playing around with query curation and development, in addition to visualization and then we also have some other technologies, a specific platform called Gala that we're trying to integrate with Wikidata. So this is all part of this resource hub that we're developing with a lot of folks involved. And Luis, we can go to the next slide.
Yes, so I would like to provide more details about the work on the Resource Hub before Dorothy explain the details on the work of curation of data for Wikidata. So on the project mapping task, this is something I've been developing with a colleague, a postdoc at Notre Dame, Matthias Milia. So what we did was that we had a question as a point of departure. We wanted to understand the open contributions that social environmental projects give to research in terms of research output. And we were super interested in looking into the contributions that go beyond the traditional outputs, right? As research papers, academic papers. So what we did was to take the list of all the funded NSF projects in STS, and we started mapping out the outputs of the ones that have been dedicated to the integration of social and environmental aspects. And we took projects from 2013 to 2023. And you will remember 2013 is the time when data management mandates, the data management mandate comes into effect, and that creates a demand on researchers to actually think really hard about the data management and disposition, distribution of what they produce in the context in SF-funded projects. So we mapped out 64 projects out of 65 out of 1,064 projects. We're interested in projects that engage in empirical research. So historical projects were out of the scope. We're interested, of course, in projects that released open resources, data, code, and even hardware design files. We found a couple of projects that actually engage with open hardware development in partnerships with engineers. And we were interested, as I mentioned before, in working and studying projects that have engaged with climate impacted communities. So we developed this, we did this project mapping, and then we included the output of this mapping effort into Wikidata. We started taking all of these, what we found in these projects, and we started to add to Wikidata. So next slide, please. So for you to have an idea of how this project is structured, we have a colleague named Gerd Hebert from the HDF group who has been working on the Research Hub as part of our partnership. And he came up with a way of visualizing how we're integrating different aspects of the collaboration. So you have, for example, a user loop which is the loop where you have people actually taking advantage of what is produced, what is curated, by another loop, which is considered the expert loop. So in the expert loop, you have people who have domain knowledge, but you also have communities that are facing carrying the brunt of the climate impact and have substantial, in many cases, substantial knowledge of the transformation of their own environments. And then we have another loop that we take into consideration, which is extremely important for our conversations about FAIR, which is the so-called automation loop, where we try to automate aspects of the data management that, of course, can be automated. So by combining the user loop in the expert loop, we have the ethical concerns, we have the care principles integrated in what we try to do in other forms of curation. And in the automation loop, of course, we try to incorporate all the FAIR elements that we are trying to drive and push forward with the work that we do. So next slide, please. So for you to have an overview, we have been working on this for quite some time. So we did the data collection, we registered the outputs on Wikidata on the first year. The second year, we started to expand this, and Dorothy has been doing this work of creating the knowledge graph, expanding the knowledge graph with members of our research network. And we also started to design an interface between an environmental sustainability platform called Gala and Wikidata. We started to design this module to integrate the platform with the Wikidata, and we run a user test and collected feedback to actually implement this. The implementation is ready, and this is something that we advanced this year, 2025. So we are completing the SEEKCommons knowledge graph. We're improving the Gala data integration and support with support for metadata standards, which is something that we're really keen on pushing forward. And we're also trying to offer Gala and Wikidata training as part of something that we designed for the SEEKCommons project, which is a fellowship curriculum that we created. And every year we accept 9 fellows, research fellows, and they go through training in the literature on the commons, in open source licensing and technologies, in scientific tools for environmental research, Wikidata training, and many other modules that we designed for them in this program. So next slide, please. So just a quick overview. So we have this Wikidata and Gala integration project. We have the module already implemented. Now we're in the phase of actually documenting it and providing training, as I mentioned. Next slide, please. So it's what we do is basically to allow for users of the sustainability platform, Gala, that contains several hundreds of case studies, sustainability case studies. We created this possibility for us to query Wikidata and bring entities from Wikidata with rich metadata into Gala. And why we're doing this is because Gala is fantastic in terms of as an educational and research tool, but they needed to implement, they needed to take care of the FAIR and make the platform fair. So we're actually working on the back end to bring rich metadata from Wikidata into Gala. So that's part of the effort here. So next slide. So now I'm passing back to Dorothy, and she will explain to us the details of the work on curating the knowledge graph.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I believe we have until 3:45, so we're doing pretty well on time here. And part of our work has been developing and curating data models. And there are a lot of existing schemas that we can use and to think about scholarly outputs. And yet there's also a lot of room for improvement. And when it comes to community-based research, as we've spoken about, papers are just the tip of the iceberg. There's many other kinds of contributions that people can make. And especially if you're, let's say, a research scientist at a university and your mandate isn't really to publish papers, but it's to publish data sets or create code and maintain software or do documentation or create syllabi. So we've been looking into these non-traditional research outputs and focusing on them as spaces that we can grow our documentation of this research network on Wikidata. And you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to give you an example. One of our colleagues, Anna, she's been focusing on developing and curating data models for open hardware in particular. And there's existing models for hardware, and there's sets of properties that you can use. And yet you can go to the next slide. There's also other kinds of things that we can do to further curate these models. So when it comes to open hardware, what Anna's been thinking about is using existing external identifiers coming from the Open Hardware Association that speak to different aspects of the certification of hardware. So there's different kinds of compliance, different kinds of certificates for compliance with the values of the Open Hardware Association that can be incorporated into Wikidata items about specific hardware. So here's an example of what Anna's been doing is proposing additions to, or proposing new properties. So for instance, this is a Open Hardware Association identifier, and really be jumping in those discussions on Wikidata to try to create these properties that can then link things like open hardware back to their certification with trusted organizations that that can help us further understand and track open hardware and open technologies on Wikidata, and then that will come down to help us as we're developing queries and visualizations to understand bigger flows of technologies and how they transform. So you can go to the next slide. We've also been doing some really basics. I mean, none of this is that basic, but we've been adding Wikidata items about researchers in the network. And we've used the existing property affiliation to tag all of the Wikidata items of our members with the SEEKCommons affiliation. So then we can query Wikidata and in different ways. And a challenge that we've negotiated is whether it's necessary to obtain consent for adding certain information about individuals. There's a lot of automation of adding in let's say the gender or the educational details of people, of persons in Wikidata, and yet we care a lot about consent and privacy, and so we've been thinking a lot about how Wikidata does not require consent for adding in an item about a person, and yet we have been thinking about going above and beyond the requirements that Wikidata specifies, and negotiating these things in a very transparent way with our research members. So getting in contact with individuals and talking to them about the Wikidata article or the Wikidata items about them, and using that as a reflection tool to learn about the semantic web and to learn about Wikidata. You can go to the next slide. We've also been just enhancing Wikidata items and adding additional statements about research outputs. We've added over 600 new items about all sorts of things like research publications, doctoral thesis, software, hardware, data sets. As LF mentioned, Gala case studies using creating Wikidata items about those case studies that are being published on the Gala platform, in addition to other things like conference papers and grants. And there's all sorts of things we can think about with Wikidata as a tool to track grants and the ecosystem of grants and funding. You can go to the next slide. And it looks like we have 5 minutes, so I think we're going to be fine. The other thing we've been doing is query curation and development. So here's just some examples of some queries we've developed that are specific to our own network, and just basic things like how many Gala case studies have Wikidata nodes, and how many humans are affiliated with the project, and what kinds of statements are made about the project, what kinds of events are organized. So creating those queries that allow us to develop insights about our own community. And you can go to the next slide. This is just yet another example of a kind of queries that we're developing. But given the time, I'm going to move on to just talking about visualization, because we haven't just been making, the next slide, making our own queries, but just using other platforms that already have default Wikidata queries that have nice interfaces and displays. So if you don't know about Scholia, I do encourage you to check it out, scholia.toolforge.org. And this is a fairly new project that has funding, some of the funding's coming from the Wikimedia Foundation. And they have all sorts of default queries that you can use. So if you were to tag a number of members of your team with the same affiliation, you can query the organization. You can create insights about the organization as a whole. And they have default queries for different kinds of groups, like a research group. So things like, so we can look at the recent publications of the members of our group. And we're getting better at doing this, so we can generate insights about, okay, so at each month, what are the publications that are coming out from members of this group? And meanwhile, developing in this helping out by providing feedback to the developers of Scholia, and really thinking about, okay, we're not just using this tool, but we can also suggest areas for improvement and suggest potential default queries that they could embed in the future. And you can go to the next slide. And they have all sorts of great things, like you can look at the keywords that different members of your research network are using. And so then you can use those keywords to really think about, okay, as a group of 60 individuals, what are the most common keywords that we're using in our publication? So you can go to the next slide. There's all sorts of fun things like word clouds that you might be familiar with that can also be easily generated using Wikidata, and this is, I think, word clouds are a very common, or potentially common, example of how by visualizing data in a user-friendly way, we can explore our connections and explore patterns. And at the same time, I'm going to pass over to LF to we're going to begin our conclusions here with a couple talking about some challenges, and then also talking about some bigger problems that we'd like to discuss with you. So you can go to the next slide.
Yes, so one of the things we have been thinking really hard, and this is a question for the open source community at large, is the question of sustainability of the projects that we work on and we release as part of the digital commons. So for us, when engaging with Wikidata, our commitment was to contribute to something that is public, something that's part of the digital commons as well, but also something that provides long-term sustainability for the resources that we are curating. So this is something that has been very much in our mind, and it has been a challenge. Another aspect also is we have been having a bit of a difficulty when it comes to engaging resource network members in the work that we want to do with semantic web technologies, because as you all know, as professionals in this area and researchers, the learning curve is pretty steep when it comes to semantic web technologies, right? Like once you get accustomed to the concepts, it's easier to navigate, but in the beginning, it can be daunting. The question of measurement of impact, it can be more delicate. Of course, this is something that we have been considering. And there's also something we wanted to discuss with you all, is that Wikidata has been subjected to a split between scholarly references and the rest of the knowledge graph of Wikidata, and that has impacted us. So this is something that we have been dealing with. And just to
And
wrap up, yeah,
Mhm.
please go ahead, Dorothy. Like you can take us, yeah, we can help us wrap up.
Okay, yeah, I know we're out of time here, but we did want to just raise this question that we can bring to the discussion at the end of all the presentations. And that is, what do we do about the extraction and hoarding of the open semantic web data by AI companies? We know that Wikidata is heavily relied upon by ChatGPT and many other LLMs and all sorts of other AIs being trained on Wikidata. So by participating in Wikidata, we're also opening ourselves up to different kinds of digital enclosure. So we'd like to continue discussing how that we can continue doing this great work in the commons while also avoiding future entrapment by proprietary technologies that will try to be sold back to us. And with that, we are so grateful for your time, and we can absolutely share some links in the chat. Thank you so much. We'll pass it on back to Mark.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, Louise. Okay, now we enter the sort of Thunderdome section of this Zoom session where we will have 5 lightning talks. The first of which is by Sarah DeMonico, who is talking about, or the title of which is From Biographical Dictionary to Linked Data. And I will leave it to her. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I'll set up the slides. Hey. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah, and thank you for attending this talk. From Biographical Dictionary to Linked Data is a talk in which I will explain briefly the main points of what was my graduation project that dealt mainly with Wikidata and authority control. The project is divided into 3 parts. The first one, which was project definition and source choice, a part on data entry and curation, and the last one that was that dealt with corpus descriptive analysis. After consulting different sources, the one that I ended up choosing was a biographical dictionary of writers from the 20th century. The work of these writers was published under at least one pseudonym, and okay, I'm sorry. And that meant that it was made up of about 490 authors. The characteristic of this biographical dictionary meant that I was able to find all these authors in at least one of the authority files that I consulted. And I was able to see how these authority files dealt with pseudonyms. Most of them followed the RDA standard, which means that they created different authority records for the different identities that the author might have adopted during their publication life. The only different one is the main authority file from Italy, which is SBN, which follows the Italian cataloging rules. And in SBN, there is a single authority record for a single physical person, and the different identities that this person might have adopted are considered variant forms, and we link back to the authority record that was created. After choosing these dictionaries as this dictionary as, of course, these are the authority files that I consulting during this project, which are SBN, which is the Italian one, GND, IDREF, ISNI, and VF. Before going through Wikidata, I digitalized the dictionary and created a list of the entries of the dictionary in order to use OpenRefine to reconcile the entries of the dictionary with the items already existing in Wikidata. I was able to reconcile about 80% of the orders, and I added some information in batch using quick statements, mainly about the pseudonyms used by these authors. And then I had to revise manually all these items in order to add information such as place of birth and death, date of birth and death, occupation, and additional information that could be found in the dictionary. I had to do this manually because much of this information was already in Wikidata, and sometimes there were discrepancies between what was found in the dictionary and what was found already in Wikidata. And I had to look up additional sources in order to back up one value or the other. I then proceeded to create new items for the missing authors in Wikidata. I did this again through quick statements, and then I manually revised them in order to add the information that was missing. While consulting the authority files that I mentioned before, I was able to report some problems or errors that I could found in different way. For example, the main the main reports that I was able to actually send were the one in SBN, when I was able to send reports about duplicates, wrong qualifiers, conflations, also wrongly attributed bibliographic records to a user that had editing access to SBN. I was able to do the same with conflations in IDREF, while if I found an author through while looking through the bibliographic records in the GND that didn't have an authority record, I could report that for creation via Wikidata. The last part of the data entry of this project dealt with homonyms. I had to make sure to disambiguate the items corresponding to the authors in my dictionary with their homonyms. What I did was mainly look through Wikidata, SBN, and the catalogs in mix and match in order to create new items for the homonyms or manually revise the already existing ones. Then I created a summary tables with the homonyms I found during the project that is available on the Wikidata page of this project. These are some statistics that give an idea of what a project like this would entail, and they were collected using some Wikidata tools. The last part of this project dealt with the scripting analysis of the corpus. So, and what I focused on was mainly the authors in general, the quality of the source. There were some mistakes or discrepancies between what was found in the dictionary and what was already in Wikidata, and the author's relevance in the authority files and other databases. For example, we could see that the main part of the authors were male, while mostly all of them used only one or maybe two pseudonyms. I was able to plot the distribution of the places of birth and death of the authors. We can see that while the authors come from different parts of Italy, most of them moved through their lives towards culturally relevant cities such as Rome. I was then able to plot the distribution of the birth and death years and to calculate the lifespan of the authors. Finally, I was able to plot the distribution of the occupation, and we can see that the author of the dictionary, Renzo Frattarolo, used the word writer in a very broad sense, because in this dictionary we can find, yes, writers, poets, but also politicians, translators, literary critics, and so on. What I could gather about the source itself was, for example, the times. A value from the dictionary was not considered the best value, which happened a lot, for example, with the dates of birth and death, and the difference between the years of these dates, the ones in the dictionary, the ones that were considered best rank. Going through the external identifiers, we can see that most of them are from VF contributors, but the others could also be found in other biographical dictionary. In this part of the queries, we were also able to see which identifiers had multiple values. For example, in the slide, we can see the VF and the ISNI. And finally, I was able to see how many items had a certain number of identifiers among the statements. In average, for these authors, is about 30 to 40 identifiers, which suggest a good relevance in authority files and in external databases of these authors. All the queries used in this project are available on the main page or the main Wikidata page for the project, which you can find in this slide. And of course, feel free to ask me any question about this project or reach out on LinkedIn. Thank you, everyone, for attending this talk.
Thank you, Sarah. That was wonderful. We're going to keep things moving. Again, we're holding questions for after all of the lightning talks, where we will have about 15 minutes to deal with them at that time. The next speaker is Mary Campani. Her talk is entitled LCCNbot 1 Year On an Update. Mary is the authorities metadata librarian at Cornell University. Her interests are authority control, Wikidata, and multilingual, multi-script metadata. Thanks. I'll leave the rest to Mary.
Hi, everyone. I'm hoping that you can see my slides and not my script. Okay, somebody holler if you can see my script instead of...
No script.
Fantastic. So my name is Mary, and today I'll be giving you all an update about LCCNbot, a Wikidata bot that automatically adds LCNAF identifiers to Wikidata. There are a few links in this presentation, so you're welcome to download the presentation from Sched to access them. Before we get too deep into the update, let me explain what LCCNbot is. LCCNbot is a script that uses the activity streams on id.loc.gov to identify newly updated Library of Congress name authority records. These are records that are used to identify and disambiguate authors, corporate bodies, geographic locations, and sometimes also subjects within library records. Authority records are the glue that binds the bibliographic universe together. So, once LCCNbot has identified a newly updated name authority record, it checks to see if there is a 024 or $670 pointing to Wikidata in that record. If one exists, it checks to see if the LC identifier or LCCN is present in Wikidata. If it isn't, or if it's present without the subject named as qualifier, it will add that information to the Wikidata item. Both successful and unsuccessful edits are compiled into a report. For the past year and a half or so, 5 volunteers, Sasha Prezell, Liz Pluntz from the National Library of Medicine, Crystal Uragi from University of Washington, Kelly Davis of Yale University, and now the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands, and I monitor the report and correct any unsuccessful edits. Edits are typically unsuccessful if a different LCCN already exists on the Wikidata item, if the here we go. If the bot just had a hiccup and wasn't able to add the subject named as qualifier. The bot runs every weekday at 9 a.m. Eastern, and the report maintainers do our best to check and resolve anything odd in the report every weekday. If you were here for last year's LD4 conference, this all may sound very familiar to you. The update starts now. So what's new? LCCNbot has run for 1.5 years now, and we are so pleased to report that in that time, it has made 17,500 edits total. In 2024, it made about 12,500 edits, and so far in 2025, it has made about 5,000 edits as of last week, Friday, or whenever I made these slides. In 2024, we had the bot make updates based on older records from 2023. So I would have expected that 2024 would have a lot more edits than 2025. However, it looks like we are on track to have the number of edits in 2025 hit 10,000 total, which is much more than I had imagined that we would get in a single year. That being said, this is just a drop in the bucket compared to the millions and millions of records in the LC name authority file. So if you are a NACO contributor, please continue adding Wikidata identifiers to your name authority records when you update them, and encourage your colleagues to do so as well. We're also, okay, this is the not so good part, but we're also disappointed to report that the VIAF suggestion function is broken with no anticipated repair date. Previously, up until about January, when a VIAF identifier was in the O24 of a name authority record, the bot would make a suggestion to add it to a Wikidata item linked to the VIAF cluster, which one of the human maintainers would review and add, not quite manually. We had a quick statement for it that we still had to double check to make sure everything checked out before we ran the quick statements. Since VIAF's major interface change in January 2025, this function has not worked, and we are not sure when it will be fixed. If you know Python and want to take a swing at repairing it, you're welcome to take a look at the bot's GitHub page. I'm really sorry, I'm not good enough with Python to be able to fix it myself, and Matt has his hands full with other projects, so if you or your colleagues link to VIAF in your O24s in hopes that we will add your LC identifier to Wikidata for you, I would suggest that you please link directly to Wikidata in addition or instead of linking to VIAF. Sorry about that. All right, looking toward the future. The other big change that we're thinking about is how the report is maintained. So when VIAF was first announced on the Program for Cooperative Cataloging listserv last year, we had 5 volunteers from the list offer, not 4 volunteers, because there's 5 total, and anyways. So we allocated a volunteer to each weekday. Kelly Davis recently took on a new position and decided to pull back from report monitoring in May. So since then, I've been monitoring the report twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. Kelly pulling back has opened up some new questions for us about how the LCCNbot reports will be maintained into the future. It seems like overkill to email the entire PCC list to fill a single slot every time someone needs to term off. So we wondered if it might make more sense to fold LCCNbot report monitoring into the new MCO Wikidata community of practice, especially since Crystal, Sasha, and I are already involved in it, though we have assured Liz that if she wants to maintain involved, even if we fold it into MCO, she is welcome to keep fixing the report without being part of MCO. Monitoring the report is pretty straightforward, so it might be a good fit for someone who just finished NACO training and is interested in entity management. This is something that we might bring to that group once the structure of MCO is a little bit more settled, since so much of it is still in flux and being determined. If you have any thoughts, please share them in Slack, because this is all very It's very much something that we're thinking about, but have not actually made plans for. Finally, we're almost done. A call to action. If you don't add Wikidata identifiers to your name authority records, please consider doing so. It strengthens the linked data ecosystem, and besides that, I feel like it's so easy to forget to add an LC identifier to a Wikidata item after you've made a new LC authority record, so this helps to reduce the amount of human error in that sense. Since the VOF suggester is not working, please consider adding Wikidata identifiers in your records in addition to the VOF ones. Next, please, 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 please double check that the identifiers you use are correct. I think there's a tool that helps catalogers by automatically adding Wikidata identifiers to name authority records, and that is fantastic. But if you use a tool like that, it is your responsibility as the cataloger to click on the link your tool has added and make sure it points to where you want it to go. If there isn't an LC identifier on the Wikidata item, LCCNbot will add it without question. And we will not know about it until another user reverts it and tells us. Let's not waste other users' time. Let's not waste other librarians' time. Let's not add LC identifiers for Armenian literary critics to fictional ethnic groups from Star Wars, please. Last, if you'd like to help monitor the report on Thursdays, please drop me an email or a Slack message. We're still discussing what long-term maintenance looks like for LCCNbot, but in the meantime, there is a spot that can be filled, and you can be the one to fill it. It would be ideal if you know how to merge NACO records, but if you don't, it's not a problem. We'll walk you through it. It's easy peasy, and realistically, you'll only have to do it like once a month, maybe. They really don't come up that often. Thank you so much for your attention, and many, many thanks to Crystal, Kelly, Sasha, Liz, and Matt for your hard work making sure that LCCNbot runs smoothly every day. My email address is mgc96@cornell.edu. Please reach out if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, or suggestions, as long as those thoughts and suggestions don't include me learning Python. I kid. I'm thinking about it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mary. That was great. Moving along in our itinerary, our next speaker is Claire Fox. The title of her lightning talk is Supporting Access to CD-ROMs While Using and Contributing to Wikidata. Claire is the Software Preservation and Emulation Librarian at Yale University Library. She works there with colleagues at Yale and beyond to preserve born digital collections that are dependent on obsolete software for access. She lives in Portland, Oregon. With that, I'll leave it in Claire's hands.
Thanks so much, Mark. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. I'm going to share my screen. I'm having like a little bit of trouble with like my screen sharing, so I might not be able to see you all while I'm screen sharing, but we'll see how this goes. Alrighty. Okay, so you should see slideshow playing from the start. Does that look okay?
So we see your PowerPoint, the whole window with all of the icons and everything.
The whole window with all of the icons.
So not presenter mode.
Oh, okay. So you just see the slide.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Alrighty. So yeah, thank you all so much for coming to this presentation today. My presentation is titled Supporting Access to CD-ROMs While Using and Contributing to Wikidata. And I'm Claire Fox. Like Mark said, I'm the Software Preservation and Emulation Librarian at Yale University Library. Yeah, I'm going to be presenting today about some of the work we've been doing to build a community of practice within the software preservation and emulation unit around Wikidata that we're hoping to extend across different institutions as well. So let's see, next slide. Here. So the software preservation and emulation unit at the library at Yale.
Your presentation did not advance.
Oh, it didn't? Okay, let's see. Try something else.
What we're seeing is not PowerPoint in presenter mode. It's just in the editor mode.
Oh, strange. Okay. Let me see here. Your screen. So sorry, everyone. I haven't even seen like this view of what is going on here before. Okay, exited out of that. Let's see if, all right. Okay. Hmm. So I'm going to go into my preferences really quick and see if I can change anything. Output and sharing. No. Let's see if this works. Okay. Can you just see PowerPoint right now, but not in presenter mode?
Yeah, we're seeing the editor, exactly.
All right. And so let's see. Play from start.
That's it. There you go.
Okay. Great. So sorry, everybody. And I will try to keep this on time too. All right. So Software Preservation and Emulation Unit at Yale Library. So we're a new unit as of July 2024. Our mission is that we use software preservation and emulation to preserve and expand access to digital collections that advance teaching, research, learning, creativity, and practice, which in summary is just to say that we're very motivated to get born digital collections in front of researchers so that they can use those for new scholarly outputs. I'm going to keep moving very quickly since I ate into my own time here, but essentially one of our central kind of projects is that we're building infrastructure to support software dependent collections with emulation as a central strategy. So when I say emulation, some of you might be familiar with this as an access strategy. Essentially, it's using a host system like your own computer to access a guest system, like one that is from a different era of computing. So you could use your Windows 11 machine to access something like the Apple Macintosh Centris that's on display here in an advertisement to Yale students in Yale Daily News in 1993. Emulation allows us to provide researchers with a view of born digital collections in their original context using era-specific software environments. I realize I said a lot of different words that might not be familiar in that sentence, but I'll unpack this a little bit throughout the presentation. And so moving on, one of our central challenges that we are encountering is obsolescence. So past eras have assumed the longevity of their technology. This also, includes current eras of technology. But these past eras of very innovative software for their time go through increasingly shorter cycles of obsolescence, meaning that they're replaced by newer technologies or they just aren't accessible at all for whatever reason. This is kind of illustrated in this little close crop that I did of that previous ad from the last slide, where it says that CD-ROM technology brings vast new capabilities to the desktop, which is why soon more and more computers will include a CD-ROM drive. We, of course, know, 30 or so years later that this is not necessarily the case. Most of our computers probably don't have CD-ROM or optical drives in them, but we're trying to find ways to mitigate that access challenge for our library patrons. And so one of those ways that we're trying to mitigate that challenge is by creating era-specific software environments that include things like emulators that mimic older computers, operating systems that are from that specific era, like things like Windows 95 or System 7, and in addition, software applications that help to render born digital content. So continuing to move forward with like the 2 minutes that I have left. I'll just say what is the most salient information here. So we are trying to build software environments by sourcing copies of software. And this is really difficult information to manage. I think that managing software dependency is something that many people here are likely familiar with. So we're just trying to assess software dependencies, collect software to be able to provide access to content that's dependent on it, and then share out that information so it's more accessible to other institutions or peers. So I'm skipping information here, but I will put these slides in my, presentation page on the sketch. So going on. So 1 minute. So essentially, I worked with the the staff at the music library at Yale, the Irving S. Gilmore Music Library, to choose a selection of CD-ROMs from their collections that represented interactive content. And I'm trying to source information from their catalog records, specifically in Mark Field 538, System Details Note, to track software dependencies and share out that information. So in this research that I've been conducting, this is like System Details Note, you're all probably very familiar with it. But my research questions are here in this slide. Essentially, I'm trying to leverage information from Field 538 and then populate item records in Wikidata using that information at a very hopefully achievable level for people like myself or other librarians or archivists who are pressed for time but want to share information about software dependencies. So I selected a kind of broad example and a niche example to try to model. One is just everything that's dependent on Windows 95 in the music library. That's a kind of broader example that felt like it had a pretty straightforward solution. And then the second was a much more niche sample niche example for this software called Sample Cell, which ended up also being a hardware dependency. But just trying to wrap up, I created a profile for this information. There's some like general repeatable fields. There's also specific fields for each example. And I wanted to highlight that the sample cell example was a particularly challenging one related to modeling hardware dependencies, which I haven't found a property in Wikidata that works well for me, but it sounds like there's a lot of great research going on in that area, particularly for open hardware. And just the next steps on this are just continuing to create and refine items, collaborate with peers to see what might be useful for them, researching methods of modeling hardware dependencies, and then continuing to identify and document data models that could help extend our work. So thank you all for hanging with me as I negotiated screen sharing, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And again, I will share this information on my Sketch page.
Thanks, Claire. That was a heroic effort. You single-handedly got us back on time. For other panelists, I have been manually timing people, so nevertheless, that was great. We can move on to the next talk, which is Kathleen Burlingame, whose talk is titled Surfacing Sociotechnical Research with Wikidata. Kathleen is currently a research and reference librarian at Data and Society Research Institute and has a varied background in metadata management at academic and cultural institutions. She was one of the original conveners of the LD4 Ethics Affinity Group, and she co-edited Ethics in Linked Data, which is published by Litwin Books in 2023. And with that, I will give it up to Kathleen.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark, for that intro, and also to everyone for coming and listening. To be honest, I was a little hesitant to talk about this project here today because it is very much a work in progress. However, I've always really appreciated the LD4 community and the perspectives that you all bring. Ultimately, I'm very eager to connect with others who are possibly working on similar projects, which is admittedly especially important to me as a solo librarian, the only librarian slash metadata person at my organization. So yes, I will be talking about a Mellon-funded grant project that I started working on as of last fall at Data and Society Research Institute. Data and Society was founded in 2014 as an independent nonprofit that produces peer-reviewed research, policy, and events focused on socio-technical issues. This is interdisciplinary work that focuses on the social context and effects of existing and emerging technologies. Socio-technical research is predicated on the idea that nothing is purely technical, but created, managed, and used within complex social contexts, imbued with different perspectives and power structures. Current areas of work include critical analysis of AI systems and how technology intersects with concerns about labor, healthcare, and environmental justice. Our audience is quite broad, a mixture of academics, government policymakers, and the informed general public. So a primary task in this project is to gather 10 years worth of the intellectual outputs of the organization and make those materials better connected to other related work outside the org, better organized, more discoverable, both locally on our website, but also in external repositories and search environments. We also want to ensure accessibility, all doing this using methods, platforms, tools, and workflows that are sustainable. This project dovetails with a separate project happening concurrently to redesign our entire website. While we have an existing catalog of these materials on our current website, the metadata was produced in a very ad hoc manner. And as a result, it's very spotty and incomplete. So consequently, I have to sort of recatalog everything that's 1,300 plus items. Cataloging is in quotes here because this is not traditional library cataloging. There's no MARC, BibFrame, ILS, or even RDFA and Evolved. We use WordPress as our website platform, which has features that accommodate creating a basic searchable catalog, but nothing as elaborate as what you can do with an ILS or institutional repository software. Not working within a typical GLAMS environment requires a bit of creativity and often bespoke solutions, but also a lot of freedom. And partially because of this, I decided early on to use Wikidata as the primary controlled subject vocabulary. I also plan on enhancing and creating Wikidata items for a portion of the materials that we publish, as well as for our authors and creators with their consent. There's also a final network outreach portion to this, which will most likely consist of events and workshops for other researchers from similar organizations that would otherwise not get this kind of support. By assisting researchers who, in this sense, exist in the margins, we hope to advance the work of citational justice, which encourages exploring and citing the work of those who are and/or have been marginalized by those in power. So this is an overall plan of the platform architecture of the project. You can see WordPress as the central platform, indexing materials that may exist in external repositories or popular media sites. I'm using Baserow to do the cataloging, enriching that with Wikidata as mentioned, and then eventually loading a portion of that into Wikidata using quick statements. So why Wikidata? Beyond the advantages of de-siloing bibliographic metadata, connecting our work to a wider knowledge ecosystem, I was also excited to leverage the freedom inherent in working outside of a traditional ILS and metadata schemas. Particularly, I was excited to not be compelled to use Library of Congress subject headings. And let me be very, very clear, I have an immense respect for all the work that Library of Congress does, particularly the LCSH editorial team. I know it's really difficult work. However, having been involved in reparative cataloging over the past decade of my career, I know how problematic that can be, especially when the final decision makers are tied to a political body, and I will return to that in a minute. I just want to first give a shout out to various projects and tools that gave me inspiration for this. Curationist provides a platform for open access to digitized images from the collections of cultural heritage institutions worldwide. Notably, they use Wikidata as a source for most of their descriptive terms, and they have a really nice guide to their use of Wikidata and their local taxonomy on their website, which helped to encourage me to use Wikidata in the same way. PCC EMCO's Wikidata Community of Practice project was also just getting started at the time that I was developing this plan. Since then, it has proven to be a great place to have a community of practice to engage with as I do this work. And then both Scalia and Spinach Wikidata, I think, are really useful and well-designed tools that are really helpful for getting stakeholder buy-in for Wikidata projects. It's really hard to sell the idea of linked data to people who may not know anything about it and don't really care to know about it. So showing what kinds of visualizations can come out of it or the kinds of user queries that it can handle is really, really helpful. Okay. So there are many advantages to using Wikidata, but one that I'd like to point out is that I think compared to other linked data models, it's relatively easy to understand and use. This is important to me for two reasons. One, as grant cycles come and go, there may not be someone to manage this moving forward who has deep knowledge of linked data. So management needs to be easily transferred. Number two is that this also opens up the possibility for network collaboration with other similar organizations. So we might end up having like a sort of Wikidata hackathon style event. But I also want to emphasize the value in Wikidata as being a worldwide collaborative project, which I think has become even more palpably valuable for us in the United States recently. I think this point is well illustrated by looking at the different treatments of this particular entity. Gulf of Mexico, which was renamed in the US by executive order on January 20th to Gulf of America. And here you can see the different effects of this mandate up to now on LCSH versus Wikidata. Shortly after the US Board on Geographic Names adopted the change, LOC added it to their tentative change list, only allowing community feedback to be received by that same day. So this was highly unusual. Usually the tentative change list allows for community feedback for about 3 weeks. And changes, especially those that are controversial, usually take 6 months to many years to go through. So in this case, the change was adopted on id.loc.gov by mid-March. In contrast, the primary name in Wikidata has not changed, but the Gulf of America name has been added as an alias, which is now deprecated. And I think it's really interesting to contrast the different timelines between the two. Here you see Wikidata timeline in lavender, LCSH in orange. A discussion thread was created in Wikidata on the same day as the executive order. And then about a week later, consensus was reached. Even though LOC used an expedited process, it took much longer and seems much more final, at least in the near future. Nothing in Wikidata is ever truly set in stone, so conversation can always be reopened and can even be done so anonymously without fear of retaliation. This process fits well with the constantly evolving nature of language and its diverse social contexts. So just a quick look into my cataloging process here. As mentioned, I'm doing this in Baserow. This is an open, kind of like an open source version of Airtable. It has both spreadsheet and database-like features. I have a main table of library items that gathers all the descriptive information for these materials that links out to tables with controlled vocabulary lists. I'm able to add information from Wikidata as I go along or pop this into OpenRefine to utilize their Wikidata reconciliation tool to enrich the data with QIDs and ORCiD IDs. One of the great advantages of using Baserow is that it has an application builder. So I've been able to easily build a simple cataloging search interface over top of this database that Data and Society staff will be able to use internally while our new website is getting built. And just lastly, speaking of internal tools, I just wanted to briefly mention another much more informal project happening alongside this one. Some of my colleagues have started experimenting with the creation of localized Gen AI tools that could possibly be used to internally query and analyze our publications. For example, they used OpenAI's GPT Builder to create a custom chat GPT that references our publications. I don't have a lot of time to talk about this, obviously, but I just thought I'd mention it because I've been really interested in what all of this AI enthusiasm means for my current project, but also more generally for the future of linked data, metadata in general, and library metadata work. When they first told me that they'd be doing this, I had a moment of worry, thinking maybe my work is less needed if people just want to use AI to search for things. But after playing around with it a bit, I realized that I didn't need to worry so much because A, it didn't work very well. It seemed very obsessed with just a few publications. It wasn't returning or speaking about more than just a handful. And two, even if it did work better or very well, its use cases are a bit different than a traditional search query. So I think it's really important to be very clear about which queries and use cases are more appropriate for AI versus those that are easily handled by a well-structured linked data knowledge base, or even just a traditional library catalog, especially considering the very high environmental cost of AI. So thank you very much. Here's some of my contact information, and I would love to connect.
That was amazing. Thank you, Kathleen. Okay, moving on. Our next speaker is Sasha Frizzell, and the title of the presentation is Wikidata Workflows with ORCiD and OpenRefine, a Binghamton University case study. Sasha is the interim head of cataloging and metadata at Binghamton University. So with that, I will leave it in her hands. Thank you.
True. Thank you so much for the introduction, Mark. And thank you to the folks who've stuck around for my lightning talk. I'm going to be talking about how I've been pulling information from ORCiD, kind of doing some transformation in OpenRefine, and then using OpenRefine to move that information into Wikidata. As you heard, I'm Sasha Frizzell. I'm the interim head of cataloging and metadata. This project started because, like many other campuses, there was a push to get faculty to sign up for ORCiD. The initiative was headed by the director of technology, and he connected with me just to see how we could leverage these identifiers now that they're going to be connected and affiliated with Binghamton. Initially, he came to me hoping we would add them to the Library of Congress name authority records. We're an ALMA library, and kind of the talk of the author info cards, if you're ALMA Primo as well, got everyone interested in the authority files and how that could be leveraged. But putting them in the name authority file just wasn't the right fit for a lot of reasons. Even if we had like departmental capacity to make those manual changes, the name authority records aren't an identifier hub. And some of them don't have bibliographic utility. So that would mean kind of additional work. So it didn't fit for what we were doing here. And I knew that we could have more flexibility and opportunity if we just added those identifiers into Wikidata along with the additional information. Full disclosure, I am not familiar with API calls. So I leaned very heavily on the help of a colleague in systems to scrape this data for me. And by leaned heavily, I mean he did it for me and will continue to help me do that portion of this workflow. So he was able to retrieve the records using the umbrella of affiliation of Binghamton University at the ORCiD public API point. This is a very wide scope. So we're not only getting faculty, we're also getting students or non-employees. And in future iterations, I'm likely going to adjust the API call to reduce the scope, but we opted to keep it pretty straightforward on this side for two reasons, really. One, this was kind of my proof of concept, and I preferred the burden of labor to be on me. I'll do the work in OpenRefine instead of trying to work the code. And two, I didn't know exactly what data is going to pull from this, so I thought it would be better just to see everything, just so I have a better understanding of what can be crosswalked and what can be leveraged. I do want to add, this is only pulling information that is publicly available on ORCiD. So I didn't have concerns about reusing this information. This is something that folks have opted into. I am just moving it into Wikidata. But if you have any questions about this portion of the process, I'll have to pass it on to him. So he scraped all of the data for me into a JSON file, and I put it into OpenRefine to see what we could reasonably extract. So I used OpenRefine primarily because I knew I could use the reconciliation straight to Wikidata, and I can use quick statements so I can do batch processing. If you're not familiar with OpenRefine, it's a free application you can use to kind of view, clean, or manipulate data, and I have some links at the end of the presentation just to give you an introduction. On this side here, the top box is what the data originally looked like. It pulled out well over 100 columns of data per person. So clearing out the rows took quite a bit of time. That was my first set. Clear out rows that didn't seem helpful or seemed duplicative. And then my next step was to remove any students that were pulled here. This is really for faculty and for staff. Students, I don't think, need to be within the scope of this project. The bottom box shows the data after I'd made kind of some order of it. Roughly 50% of cases, folks already had Wikidata items, and then I just used kind of this data to enhance them. But that also means about 50% of the time I was creating new items for people. So from this data, there were a couple properties that seemed consistent and seemed fairly easy to extract. And there were others that I thought would be easier, but they ended up giving me some trouble. I want to add the caveat here that a lot of the choices that I made were based on the fact that I wasn't here to do a bunch of external research. I wanted to take the data that we had and get it moved into Wikidata. We were pulling at this point several hundred different people, and doing that amount of research just didn't work within the capacity of this project. So properties we went with: instance of human, easy. All the folks are employed by Binghamton. Occasionally we have corresponding dates that gets added. That field can be a little deceiving though, because if people change position within an organization, multiple dates will be reflected. So there is a little bit of nuance there. The records also pretty consistently had educated at and degrees and dates, and they all got their ORCiD identifier as a treat. There are other properties that were more challenging. When you add an ORCiD in Wikidata, it flags you that you need to add an occupation. And that occasionally is straightforward, but some job titles are like very creative. And without additional research, I would not be able to extrapolate what their actual job was. So I skipped that. Given name also seems straightforward, but as you're looking through the records, you can see some of these might be nicknames, some of these might be initialisms. I honestly couldn't hedge my bets that that is actually the given name. So skipped. I also gave some consideration to additional employers, but I knew reconciling all those organizations is going to take time, particularly if we're at smaller institutions. That could mean creating other additional Wikidata items, and again, slightly outside of scope. And I also didn't include works, but I do hope that I get there soon. That's kind of the next iteration I'm hoping for. One of the biggest benefits for me, and you've heard it through the talks throughout this session, is that the community has built out a suite of tools, so I don't have to do that work. Also lasers. So initially, one of the big things I leaned on was the author disambiguator. This tool allows you to search for places where a name is held as a string in a record instead of as an item, and it overwrites it. I've noticed, especially doing this work, lots of bots create items for articles, but we aren't seeing that same production level for people. And as you can see here in this slide, this faculty author has 41 possible works that could be attributed to him. I think this is kind of a natural progression, but it can be time consuming, especially if they've worked in a lot of different fields or in a lot of different areas. So I'm hoping to expand it over time. I also use Scholia visualizations for the before and after to help show some of the value in the work. We've seen some folks showing us Scholia in the visualizations kind of in this session, but it essentially pulls information from Wikidata for us. And that gave us an easy way to increase information and connections. After this first run, we went from under 400 people affiliated with Binghamton up to 850. And of course, we then saw the natural expansions in co-authors, in subjects, and in page production. Working on my second round of processing soon after this conference is over. And I'm hoping to find kind of a sustainable cadence for the work. We aren't going to have that same influx of people getting ORCiD identifiers, but I think I can expand the properties, and I think I can kind of expand the process for what I'm crosswalking. And I'd like that to be what the focus is of these next iterations. I'd also like to find a way to get the works in there. If they aren't there already, I think that's a really valuable part, so we can get some of that reconciliation and we can get that reciprocal linking between the two. If this is all super new to you, I have a bunch of instructions here. They're available on my slides on SCAD. This was all very new to me too, so it's achievable stuff. But thank you so much for your time and your attention.
Thanks, Sasha. That was amazing. So that brings us to the end of this Thunderdome portion. We've gone through all the lightning talks. We have time for questions. In fact, we have until 5 p.m. Eastern /2 p.m. Pacific. So I believe we have a couple that have been saved up from the chat. I think Bree, the co-host / co-moderator, has been keeping track of those. So
Yep. So the first question that came in was from Sylvia for Dorothy and Luis. Her question was, and she apologized that she was having technical issues, so maybe it was mentioned, but would it make sense for the team to be in contact with other projects modeling research, or are they already in contact with other teams? And then if that is the case, would love to learn more about what they have learned from cross-pollinating with others.
Hello, Dorothy. Do you want me to take this one? I can.
If you want to start.
Yeah. So, this is thank you for the question. This is a really important question. So, we don't know of other groups modeling social environmental research with a focus on open outputs like we do. But we are in contact with the developers of Scholia and people who have been very active in the Wikidata community, who are also interfacing with Scholia. And they have been doing serious work of data modeling, and they are the primary group that we are in touch with, including one of the Scholia core team members is part of our project. So that's the main interface we have. But if you have suggestions, we would love to hear. If you see other groups doing similar work on modeling research, that would be important for us to read and know about.
Yeah, I'm not sure of other groups doing this too, but I hope to find them. I think that I am in library school now, and I was thinking about how the Pratt Library checks out video games from the library, right? And there's ways of cataloging games and software and all that in libraries. And librarians are getting more and more experienced at cataloging software and hardware, and archivists have developed lots of ways of doing it over time. So I think talking to librarians that have a focus on the history of technology, maybe at the Computer History Museum in the Bay Area or something like that it would be very interesting to speak more generally about cataloging software and hardware. I know the Computer History Museum there, and also our colleague in this panel with thinking about CD-ROMs, and I think you mentioned, I think it would be great to chat more about the crossover there. There's obviously a lot of proprietary CD-ROMs, but just yeah, I'd like to learn more.
Thank you.
Great question.
The next question was for Mary Campany. So also from Sylvia, is the LCCNbot training somewhere to be found on Wikidata Commons so we can share it with potential collaborators or even translate it?
You know, that is such a good question, Sylvia. And also, if you're Sylvia Gutierrez from the Wikimedia Foundation, I'm really happy you're here, and I'm sorry I missed your presentation yesterday. So for now, the LCCNbot work is not a whole lot, right? There's only 17,000 edits a month. So all of the documentation currently lives in a Google Doc that is shared with the maintainers. I'm not sure if it necessarily makes sense to add it to Commons, since there is not a whole lot of work to be done, as long as it remains split between 5 people. But that's certainly something that we can consider. I'm also in the same vein, I'm not sure how much value it would bring to translate said documentation, since most people working in the LCNAF are pretty good at English. But yeah, certainly worth thinking about. Thank you.
Then the next question is not a question, but a comment. And it was a comment that was from both Sylvia and Christine. And this was directed at Kathleen for her presentation. If you create a list of use cases in which linked data is more appropriate than Gen AI and vice versa, they would love to learn about it. So I guess reach out to them if you have any use case stuff about that. And then the last question we have, and that was also from Sylvia, and this was for Sasha's presentation, was first a compliment. This is a very interesting pipeline. Wonder if you have documented this somewhere and or would be interested in converting this into a Wikilearn module for people either completing the OpenRefine one or working on matching academic profiles with Wikidata.
Thank you. That is so kind. I have not this is kind of my first piece of actually documenting any part of this project. So we have this, I have some folks who are interested here in the State University of New York consortium interested in doing the same work. So I do hope to get it written down and get something that is a little bit more in the weeds about how this process works. But I think if you think it would fit as a Wikilearn module, I'd be very open to having that conversation.
And if everybody could look at the chat, because there was a little bit of a conversation also based on the last presentation about occupations and things like that for Wikidata. So yeah, that was it. That was all the questions we had. As far as I can tell, there was nothing that came in from Slack. So if anybody else has anything.
Thanks, Bree, for handling that. I think that might conclude sort of the formal part of this session, but I'm going to keep the room open for the next, say, 20 minutes. If the panelists want to stick around, if people want to stick around the chat, they're free to do so. If the panelists want to talk to one another, I think that would be fine. But if there aren't more formal questions in the chat, then I think we can release people with about 20 minutes left over in the session. Wanted to pick up on a comment that someone made earlier up in the chat about Claire's presentation. They loved the sort of 1993 era PC magazine advertisements, and I did as well. I thought that was great.
I'll just unmute to say that I also love them. So I'm glad that that is shared amongst all us here.
I wonder if anyone has thoughts on the discussion that Luis Felipe and I were raising about the enclosure of the public domain, and how do we continue doing this work knowing that AI companies are training their data and making lots of money on all of the work that we're doing to assemble the semantic web.
I can comment on that. I mean, I think the issue is not so much entrapment for things that are open access, but attribution. I've noticed that AI is particularly bad at citing their sources, either in their training materials or things that are used for RAG or whatever. So that would be my main concern. I mean, all publicity is good publicity, as they say. So that's not the issue. It's more like, are you going to literally steal this and not give credit to the researchers? Yeah, and I don't know how, I'm not an AI expert technically, so I don't know how to make that happen, but that would be my main concern.
Can I just comment from the perspective of I work with the Getty vocabularies team, and I think attribution is like a great angle on this. One of the angles that we've taken on it is, of course, that I mean, one of the problems is that when AI companies sort of slam your servers with requests, that can cause very serious practical problems. But in principle, I think that we've settled on a position where it's kind of fine. We hope that people take vocabularies that are authoritative and relatively accurate, and that it's there as kind of a source of authority on, in our case, thesauri and controlled vocabularies, and that's what it's meant for in some ways. That's not going to apply to every project though, and I can only just comment from our perspective on what we specifically work on.
Yeah, so to this point, I think one of the points of the discussion has to do with some people are calling it a distributed denial of service attack on public resources because APIs and web resources are being slammed with requests. So that's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to comment is that we brought this idea of the enclosure because that has been part of the conversation for a long time, right? In the context of Wikipedia and creating open web resources. So we thought about this idea of enclosure again, a new moment of enclosure, because it seems that for the proprietary models, foundation models, we don't get to access them, right? We don't get to benefit from them. So I think one benefit will be that they would be more accurate in being able to depict certain representations of things that we do and things out there. The things are more accurate. They're not so random and bogus. I think that could be a benefit, but we don't have access to them. We have to pay for accessing the proprietary models. So in that sense, it's something that is taken from public projects and closed, right? So I guess we are all trying to figure out what to do and what will be the way to respond and what is actually problematic, what is not, what can be beneficial in terms of creating open models that can be used locally with less of an impact in terms of ecological footprint. So I'm also trying to figure this out. So I just wanted to put these out there as some ideas and reflections.
I've been thinking a lot about the grants funding ecosystem, and I was thinking about Scholia as an example of a really cool tool that has a lot of potential that's trying to make Wikidata's interface more user-friendly and try to make queries more accessible to help with just visualizing things. And people have talked about institutional buy-in, but Google has provided a lot of money to help develop Wikidata. And if the Wikimedia Foundation can be can receive funds and then redistribute them to the folks in the community that are actually doing the hardcore data curation and metadata work, and librarians and things like that. I'm very interested in that. Like, how can, if the large big tech companies understand that they rely upon us, then and they should fund us, then we can have these third-party mediators that receives the funds and then redistribute them to the community that's doing that work. I'm really happy with the attendance of this presentation. I think it's been amazing to talk to you all. I know we're in the informal chat time, so I might have to dip out here, but thank you so much, and I hope to stay in touch with all of you.
Yeah, this was
And thank you, Mark, for hosting.
No, it was my pleasure. It was great. It was wonderful to see
Great.
all of your presentations and to hear from people in the chat. I feel like I should fill the last bits of silence also to say that my points on artificial intelligence and LLM use of Getty vocabularies is by no means the official position of the Getty Research Institute or the Getty Trust. I will let them speak for themselves. That's just a thought that I had.
No worries, Mark. You haven't turned off the recording, so
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
that
Just
on the record.
for the record.
And also, for anyone who is still hanging out watching us chat, Claire wrote to hosts and panelists that they have uploaded their slides to Sketch, so those are also available now. And as a side note for anybody else who is still here, you do not need to email me if you want to help maintain LCCNbot. I have 3 emails sitting in my inbox right now, and I greatly, greatly appreciate the interest. Thank you so much.
It's great news.